America wasn't built by committee. No, it was forged by madmen, dreamers, and rule breakers who looked at the way things were and simply said, "Watch this." Look back to 1941, when Pearl Harbor got blasted and the world seemed doomed. Did we back down? Hell no. We cranked out ships, planes, and a fighting spirit that flipped the script on war, showing nobody messes with us. Fast forward to 1983, when the Cold War had the planet sweating nukes. Again, we didn't panic. Our tech geeks and diplomats played it cool, outsmarting the odds to keep peace and save the day. But meanwhile, our car industry was taking a beating. The 1980s hit Detroit like a punch to the gut, with foreign cars swarming our streets and American muscle just sitting there, stuck in the mud. While Europe had the Porsche 930 Turbo, the original widowmaker that punished overconfident drivers with its sudden, unforgiving power delivery, America needed the exact same mechanical menace. And then came 1991, crashing in like a lightning strike when we needed it most. A secret crew of gearhead rebels got together to cook up something completely insane, a machine that wasn't just rolling off the assembly line. No, this thing was going to explode onto the scene. This is the story of the Dodge Viper, America's own widowmaker, a machine that didn't just break the rules, it wrote its own. Because in America, we don't ask permission. We burn rubber and let God sort out the rest. Now, before we dive in, you should know there are 5 key players in this story. Carroll Shelby, the Texas maverick who started it all. Bob Lutz, the ex-Marine who refused to play by the rules. Tom Gale, the designer with gasoline in his veins. Iacocca, the industry legend who saved Chrysler once before. And Team Viper, a band of renegade engineers who built a monster that would claim both glory and lives. Their decisions, their vision, and ultimately their creation would change American cars forever, sometimes with deadly consequences.
There's a lot of designing, testing, and trial runs behind every new innovation or new performance record.
Every great American story starts the same way, with someone looking danger in the face and saying, "Watch this." To get where we're going, we need to step back in time, back to 1962, to the man who lit this particular fuse. And that man was Carroll Shelby. Now, Shelby wasn't your typical car guy. He was a walking contradiction. A Texas chicken farmer who talked with the smooth charm of a used car salesman. A war veteran with steel nerves and a race car driver who decided building cars was even better than driving them. His story reads like a movie script. After training pilots during World War II, he bounced around from oil fields to trucking companies before finally finding his true calling with his hands on a steering wheel. By the late 50s, Shelby was tearing up racetracks across Europe, going head-to-head with the best drivers in the world. But every time he flew back home, one thing kept eating him. America just didn't have a sports car that could stand up to what the Europeans were building. Take the Corvette, for example. In 1962, it was more about looking pretty than running fast. A show pony, not a racehorse. Shelby wasn't having it. He knew America could do better, and he was dead set on proving it. Now, the whole thing kicked off while Shelby was sidelined with heart problems. His doctors told him racing was over, so naturally, he just switched gears. He managed to get his hands on an AC Ace, this lightweight little British roadster that handled like a dream, but had about as much power as your grandmother's sewing machine. Right around that same time, Ford was cooking up their new small block V8. Shelby's lightbulb moment was brilliant in its simplicity. Stick that American muscle into that nimble British frame, and you'd have something special. Getting Ford to play ball took some smooth talking. Shelby marched straight into Lee Iacocca's office, the rising star at Ford who would later give us the Mustang. Legend has it, Shelby told him, "Give me $25,000 and some engines." And against all odds, Iacocca said yes. Maybe it was Shelby's charm. Maybe it was a shot to stick it to Chevrolet. Either way, the deal was sealed. Shelby named his creation the Cobra, a name as deadly and aggressive as the car itself. The first Cobra prototypes came to life in a tiny California shop where Shelby's crew worked day and night without stopping. They didn't have any fancy equipment, just basic tools, welding gear, and enough determination to move mountains. And the first time they fired up that V8-powered Cobra, the noise was so incredible it shook the walls. Shelby knew right then he'd struck gold. During the test drives, the Cobra was so wickedly fast it made seasoned race drivers nervous. The steering fought you all the way. The brakes got hot and faded fast, and the back end would try to swap places with the front if you so much as sneezed on the gas pedal. In Shelby's mind, that made it absolutely perfect. By '63, the Cobra wasn't just competing, it was embarrassing cars that cost 10 times as much. When they showed up at Riverside International Raceway, Shelby's creation didn't just edge out the Corvettes, it made them look like they were standing still. The car world sat up and took notice. Just like that, America had a real contender, a sports car that could go blow for blow with anything Europe threw at us. But what really set the Cobra apart wasn't being polished or well-behaved. It was raw, mean, and completely unforgiving. A car that rewarded real skill and punished even tiny mistakes. That philosophy, that distinctly American middle finger to playing it safe, would echo through the decades. And when Dodge decided to build the Viper nearly 30 years later, they weren't just designing another sports car, they were channeling Shelby's rebellious spirit, bringing something to life that would shake the foundations all over again.
He was like the epitome of the great designers of that era, and I kept trying to tell Mr. Mitchell, you know, I think the nose should be a little lower and the tail end should be a little higher, and I think this is what we should do the lines.
Shelby's Cobra wasn't just another sports car. It was everything America loved and everything safety inspectors feared. A barely tamed beast with no roof, no mercy, and enough power to turn solid pavement into tire smokes in seconds. Sound familiar? It should, because decades before the Viper terrified a new generation, Shelby's creation proved something fundamental about American drivers. Tell us something's too dangerous, and we'll be first in line to try it. But then came 1973. The oil crisis slammed into Detroit like a sledgehammer to the kneecaps. Suddenly, America's pride, those glorious, gas-guzzling V8s, became symbols of excess in a world where fuel was more precious than gold. Japanese Econo boxes started flooding our streets, while Detroit scrambled, desperately cranking out abominations like the Ford Pinto, a car that literally exploded if you looked at it wrong, and the Chevrolet Vega, which started rusting before it even left the showroom floor. And Chrysler? They were one bad financial quarter away from becoming nothing more than a trivia question. And that's when Lee Iacocca, the same man who helped birth the Mustang, was tasked with bringing an entire corporation back from the dead. His playbook was ruthlessly simple. First, buy Lamborghini, because why not grab an Italian supercar maker when you're barely staying afloat? Second, slash every single cost that didn't directly make cars faster or cheaper. And third, bet the entire farm on the most unglamorous hero in automotive history, the K car. That plain little box on wheels didn't turn heads, but it turned Chrysler's fate. The K car platform was basically automotive Lego. They turned it into a station wagon, dressed it up as a luxury coupe, and even slapped a turbo on it and pretended it was sporty, which they absolutely did with a straight face. Was it inspiring? Not even close. but it kept the lights on when nothing else would. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While these front-wheel drive penalty boxes were keeping Chrysler's heart beating, Iacocca was quietly plotting something far more dangerous behind the scenes. Because deep in the workshops of Lamborghini, Chrysler engineers were taking notes, learning how to build something entirely different. The K-car paid the bills, but America's soul still belonged to the roar of untamed horsepower. And soon, much sooner than anyone could have predicted, that hunger would give birth to something truly terrifying. But first, Chrysler needed someone crazy enough to light the fuse. Someone who, like Carroll Shelby before him, was willing to look at the automotive world and say those magical words, "Watch this." Remember that someone crazy enough to light the fuse we mentioned? Chrysler found him in Bob Lutz, a man who, like Carroll Shelby before him, refused to accept that American cars couldn't be exceptional. If Shelby was the Texas chicken farmer who transformed into a racing legend, Lutz was his spiritual successor, a fighter pilot turned auto executive with gasoline in his veins and rebellion in his heart. Both men shared that rare ability to look at the status quo and say, "Not good enough." Both understood that great cars aren't born from committee meetings and focus groups, they're forged by passion and fearlessness. By 1987, the American auto industry was struggling. Chrysler had survived its brush with bankruptcy thanks to the K-car, but the company wasn't exactly setting the world on fire with excitement. This is when Bob Lutz arrived at Chrysler after successful stints at BMW and Ford. The former Marine pilot brought with him a proven track record of creating exceptional vehicles that consumers actually wanted. Now, Lutz wasn't a typical executive. The man was a genuine gearhead through and through, often cruising into work in a Shelby Cobra replica with the Ford badges carefully removed, just to make a point. One day, he was out in the parking lot, showing off this beast to Gale, Chrysler's design wizard who was absolutely dying to work on something, anything, that didn't have sliding doors and cup holders for soccer moms. Gale wasn't just another company man. He was a third-generation engineer with motor oil running through his veins instead of blood, and he was sick of sketching minivans. So there they stood, two car guys surrounded by a sea of boring, discussing what Chrysler could create if they dared to break the mold. What happened next is the stuff of automotive legend. Gale went home and started carving a clay model after hours, pouring every ounce of passion he had into it. The design featured smooth, aggressive lines, an incredibly long hood, and a low, sleek profile that didn't bother with a proper roof. It was like he'd mixed the DNA of a Jaguar with a Cobra and created something that would simultaneously thrill and terrify anyone who laid eyes on it. Gale knew he was onto something special, so he showed his creation to Lutz, whose pulse immediately started racing. This wasn't just another concept car, this was a shot across the bow. A chance to jolt Chrysler out of its coma and prove that America could still build automotive icons. But to pull it off, they needed more than just a slick model. They needed a crew who shared their vision. So Lutz began assembling Team Viper in secret, like they were planning a bank heist rather than designing a car. He pulled in Francois Castaing, a rule-breaking Frenchman who'd built engines that dominated Le Mans. Next came Dick Winkles, a mechanical genius who'd been tinkering with Lamborghini's mighty V12s. Remember, Chrysler owned Lamborghini at the time, giving them a direct pipeline to that Italian fire. Leading this band of rebels was Roy Huabari, an engineer who learned his craft under the legendary Zora Arkus Duntov, and the father of the Corvette himself. Huabari didn't mess around. He sent out an all-points bulletin for volunteers, and over 140 Chrysler workers stepped forward, eager to be part of something revolutionary. From this pool, he handpicked 21 of the wildest, most speed-obsessed gearheads in the company, people with racing in their DNA, because who better to build a beast than those who lived for the rush of the throttle? Lutz made an unprecedented offer to Chrysler's leadership. Give this small team just $50 million, a fraction of what typical car development costs, and 3 years to create something that would change the company's image forever. For context, most new vehicle programs at the time required hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and 5 to 7 years of development. This ragtag secret squad was now tasked with creating automotive history, but they had to keep everything under wraps. If word got out about what they were building, the whole project could have been shut down faster than a street race when cops show up. This wasn't just another car they were creating, it was rebellion in physical form, a middle finger to everything safe and sensible that had been choking the life out of American cars for nearly 2 decades. The Dodge Viper was about to be born, and the automotive world would never be the same. But first, Team Viper had to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, break every rule in Detroit's playbook, and somehow build a monster on a budget that wouldn't even cover the coffee budget at most car companies. The clock was ticking, and the pressure was. So just as Lutz assembled his secret Team Viper with those 21 hand-picked speed-obsessed gearheads we talked about, he was already planning their next moves like a general preparing for battle. He actually gave them 3 simple rules to play by. First, don't spend more than $50 million, because, well, Chrysler was basically scraping by. Next, get this thing ready for the 1992 Detroit Auto Show, just 3 years out. And finally, don't do anything sketchy that'll get Lutz in hot water. Other than that, they had total freedom. Now, that's pretty much unheard of for a big car company. No suits micromanaging, no boardroom red tape. So this crew of 21 speed-crazed gearheads was all in, ready to torch America's boring car problem. But here's the thing. Dodge's top dogs only really cared about raking in cash, not building fast cars. Most car projects actually eat up billions, but these guys were working with pocket change, barely 5% of a normal budget. So they got super scrappy. Their first prototype, nicknamed Felicity, was basically like a junkyard special. They initially tried using a Corvette mule, but it was too small, so they just tossed it aside. Then, Francois Castang cleverly snuck in truck parts, like hubs from the upcoming Dodge Dakota, to save a few bucks. Dick Winkles even dusted off a creaky 60s Hemi V8 just to make it roll. It was honestly a hot mess, but it was their mess. Still, the big hurdle was getting Lee Iacocca, Chrysler's head honcho, on board. After all, he'd gone from Mustang Maverick to the guy pushing sensible snoozemobiles. So, Lutz pulled out his ace card, Carroll Shelby, the 66-year-old legend who Iacocca could never say no to. They met in a back room at Chrysler's HQ, and man, Shelby let it rip. Chrysler had lost its mojo, America was fading, and this car was definitely the way to bring it all back. Now, Iacocca wasn't sold at first. I mean, $50 million in a recession sounded completely insane. But then Shelby's passion, plus a good look at Tom Gale's killer clay model, started to sway him. Lutz leaned in hard, and boom, Iacocca finally gave the nod to show it to the world. On January 4th, 1989, at the Detroit Auto Show, Lutz unveiled the Viper prototype, and honestly, the crowd went absolutely bananas. It was a total slap in the face to the 80s yawn fest. The name Viper actually came from a late-night chat Tom Gale had with an Ital design exec, who threw out Vipera for snake. Perfect for their sleek, deadly ride. Sure, it was just a mock-up with truck parts and an old V8, but it looked way fiercer than a Corvette and was hyped as America's fastest car ever. Fans completely lost it, sending blank checks to Dodge, desperate to own one. These checks got sent back, of course, but the hype was absolutely undeniable. So, Iacocca couldn't ignore the roar anymore. Team Viper beefed up to 85 members, now with Chrysler's full backing. And now their first major task was clear. They needed to swap out that old junk V8 for something truly special, a power plant worthy of the Viper's name. With the clock ticking and Team Viper now officially backed by Chrysler, they faced their most critical challenge, creating an engine worthy of this automotive beast. The task fell to one man in particular, Herb Helbig, a Chrysler engineer with a deep love for raw, unbridled power who couldn't wait to get his hands dirty after seeing the Viper prototype at the 1989 Detroit Auto Show. So, Herb joined Team Viper's inner circle, and his very first job was clear. Kick that tired 60s V8 to the curb and find something that would make the Viper truly terrifying. Now, you'll hear all sorts of rumors about why they ultimately picked a V10. Some say they were cutting corners, others whisper about tax tricks, or even suggest it was just a Lamborghini hand-me-down. Let's actually clear that up. No Lambo parts were involved here, just pure American madness. The real reason? They needed massive power on a broke budget, and Dodge happened to just have the thing lying around. While Italy was strutting around with their fancy V12s, and Japan was perfecting those turbo pocket rockets, Team Viper went completely rogue. They pulled a V10 straight from Dodge's truck lineup, an engine originally built for the upcoming Ram. It was an unorthodox move. V10s were typically heavy, unrefined, and far from ideal for high-performance driving. Outside of racing, almost no one used them in sports cars. But for Team Viper, working on a tight budget and already relying on existing truck components, it made perfect sense. But with only $50 million to work with, and much of the car already built from truck components, the choice was practical and efficient. The V10 fit under the massive hood perfectly, requiring no major re-engineering. It was a bold move that aligned with the team's resourceful, performance-first philosophy. To make this work properly, they definitely needed help. Roush Performance initially mocked up early V10s, but for actual production, they tapped Lamborghini, Chrysler's high rollers subsidiary back then. Lambo took that chunky iron block, slimmed it down with aluminum, and polished it just enough to roar. And what came back was an 8-liter, 400 horsepower beast, less Ferrari finesse, more angry tractor. It didn't sing, it bellowed, shaking the Viper's frame like a caged animal trying to break free. Now, the engine was only half the fight. That V10's torque could shred a weak transmission. So they turned to Getrag, Germany's gearbox wizards who'd tuned shifters for Porsches and BMWs. Getrag took one look at the Viper's power and backed away, scared American drivers would thrash their precision gears to dust. In their place, Borg Warner, an American company with a strong track record in durable drivetrain systems, stepped in. They delivered a 6-speed manual transmission rugged enough to handle the Viper's raw power and unpredictable behavior. And when that V10-powered prototype finally hit the streets, man, gearheads from Seattle to Miami were completely floored. It was like America's automotive soul had finally found its wheels again. And when Bob Lutz and Lee Iacocca took the Viper prototype out for a spin, the decision became obvious. The engine roared, the chassis held tight through the corners, and everything about the car felt raw and alive. It wasn't just a concept anymore, it was ready. From that drive onward, there was no more debating or delaying. The Viper was happening. So, on May 26, 1991, Carroll Shelby himself drove the Viper to lead the Indy 500, and predictably, the crowd went absolutely wild. In just 3 years, on a shoestring budget, Team Viper had actually birthed something revolutionary, the Dodge Viper. It was essentially a Cobra reborn, but meaner, louder and more powerful. Those snakes were finally out, and America's automotive passion was roaring back to life. But the real question was, could this raw, untamed beast actually survive on public roads? And would the public survive it? The question of whether the public could handle this untamed beast was answered in 1992 when the Dodge Viper finally hit the streets. And man, this thing was pure chaos on wheels. It had a flimsy canvas top that was basically useless in rain, no actual door handles, and a seatbelt that served as its only real safety feature. No options, no luxury package, just a monster engine strapped to four wheels pointed at the horizon. Comfort was never part of the equation. Dodge, once known for its family-friendly minivans, had taken a hard turn toward the wild side. Bob Lutz's vision had come to life perfectly. The Viper was essentially a 90s Cobra, shattering every automotive mold along the way. It quickly became America's renegade hero, completely redefining what US cars could be. People lined up around the block, not for safety or comfort, but because the Viper was just so damn wild. Faster, meaner, and actually cheaper than a Corvette ZR1, with an attitude that basically dared you to try and tame it. But here's the grim truth. The Viper was pretty much a death machine, and its flaws made it a total nightmare in the wrong hands. It had no traction control, no ABS brakes, and a chassis so twitchy it could snap into a spin at high speeds, especially if you weren't an experienced driver. Soft motor mounts shook the shifter so badly that drivers often accidentally shifted from third to second instead of fourth, suddenly unleashing 465 foot-pounds of torque that could send the car careening out of control. The Viper's signature side exit exhausts were a standout design feature, but they came with a dangerous side effect. They ran so hot that they could actually burn skin, or worse, ignite clothing. During one press test, Francois Castang's pants literally caught fire, nearly sending him to the hospital with serious burns. An insider at Chrysler, spilling the beans anonymously years later, posted online, "I worked for the Chrysler Group for a few years. Almost 2 out of 5 Vipers sold do not make it from the showroom to the owner's driveway. I had to go to one of their plants, and one of the bigwigs said this." Now, exaggerated or not, insurance companies completely freaked out. Viper crashes cost 7 times the average car accident. Journalists regularly wiped out on test tracks, warning in their reviews that this could very well be your last drive. Tragically, those warnings weren't just for show. The Viper had already claimed lives. In 2006, Dr. Jose Gonzalez lost control of his Viper on a Louisiana highway, flipping the car at over 100 miles per hour. He didn't survive. Just a year earlier, in Van Meter, a teenager behind the wheel of a Viper crashed and the car erupted into flames, killing the passenger instantly. Go back even further to 1996, and a father and son in Florida died when their Viper spun out and slammed into a guardrail. So, did that scare buyers off? Hell no. Dodge actually leaned into the danger, letting those horror stories spread like gasoline on a fire. True or not, it definitely worked. Americans heard about this unhinged beast and went absolutely crazy for it. It tapped into that rebel spark, the one that loves midnight drag races and defying the odds. The Viper didn't just save Chrysler's bank account, it reignited America's automotive pride, making us loud and fearless again. But honestly, the magic didn't last forever. Lee Iacocca eventually retired, passing Chrysler to Suits, who just didn't get what made the Viper special. Lutz bailed too, refusing to watch his creation get softened and domesticated. Tom Gale moved on to work on the Prowler, but nothing ever quite captured the Viper's raw fire. Herb Helbig and Roy Swabury were gradually sidelined, and later Vipers became safer, pricier, and way too tame. Basically everything the original wasn't. Still, That first Dodge Viper remains an absolute legend, a middle finger to the ordinary and the safe. It was America's untamed spirit cast in steel and fiberglass, a machine that laughed at caution and lived purely for the thrill. It didn't care about being perfect. It was loud, dangerous, and unmistakably ours. A rebel that showed the world we'd rather burn out than fade away. In the end, the Viper didn't just save a company, it saved something more important: America's automotive soul. It reminded us that cars aren't just appliances for getting from A to B. They're expressions of freedom, rebellion, and the courage to push boundaries. The Dodge Viper may be gone now, but its spirit lives on in every car that dares to be more than just transportation. It was, and always will be, the beast that couldn't be tamed. A true American original born to burn rubber and break rules.